Selen stood beneath the towering blossom trees of Lyrate, her dark violet skin dappled in the fractured light that filtered through petals wide as sails. The air shimmered with the low hum of pollen motes, each one pulsing in rhythm with the garden's breath. She closed her eyes and let the sound wrap around her heart like a familiar lullaby. It had always been this way, ever since she was a child. The garden spoke, and she listened. But today the garden spoke with a different voice. She had come to the sacred grove for her final cycle, the bloom that would end her life and nourish the roots of her ancestors. It was a tradition older than the recorded winds. Every blossom guard, upon reaching the seventh turning, offered her life through sacred union. A final mating, a last exchange of energy, and then the chosen would dissolve gently into the soil. Her clan called it the Great Return. Others called it honor. Selen had never doubted it. Until now. She opened her eyes. In the distance, amid the lush spiral pathways of the ceremonial garden, a strange figure moved. Human, unmistakably. No ridges along the forehead, no glimmering scar seals on their skin. He walked with a slow, almost reverent gait, sketchbook in hand, pausing occasionally to crouch beside a bloom or run his fingers gently along a fallen petal. The translator glyph embedded in her wrist flickered softly. She activated it with a flick of her pulse and waited for the information to resolve. Subject, Nail Rawson. Designation, Cultural Artist Observer, Terran Delegation. Clearance, Unrestricted Visual Documentation, No Ceremonial Access. Purpose, Flora Studies/Artistic Diplomacy. He shouldn't be here. Not in this section. The final grove was protected. Selen moved silently through the garden paths, her steps as quiet as the falling pollen. The ceremonial sashes of her robe, woven in bright sapphire thread and dotted with memory beads, swayed with each motion, a quiet whisper of her status. She didn't call out. Not yet. Nail stopped by a blossom half opened, a radiant, violet-pink creature with a scent so strong it could blur time. He reached into his satchel and pulled free a delicate scanner brush, brushing the edge of the petal with a tenderness that startled her. "You're far past the allowed borders," Selen said quietly, just behind him. He startled and turned. The surprise on his face quickly melted into curiosity. He didn't step back. "I know. I'm sorry. I saw this bloom from the outer paths and I couldn't help myself." Selen studied him. He had olive-toned skin with sun-scattered freckles, long dark hair tied loosely at the back of his neck. His eyes were the color of bark after rain, warm, thoughtful, not fearful. "You trespass in the sacred grove of the chosen," she said. "This is not a space for human observation." He nodded, genuinely apologetic. "I wasn't trying to disrespect. It's breathtaking. Your species, your traditions, your flora, it's unlike anything I've ever encountered. I had to see it up close." "Curiosity," she said, tilting her head. "That is a dangerous trait among my people." "And yet," he said gently, "you came to speak with me instead of calling your guards." A strange warmth stirred in her chest. She wasn't used to being read so easily. "I am not a guard," she said, then paused. "I am Selen of the Blossom Guard. Tomorrow, I begin my bloom." Nail's brow furrowed. "You mean, the ritual?" "Yes," she said. "I will complete my cycle, bond with a selected mate, and dissolve into the roots to nourish the cycle anew." He stepped back, eyes wide. "Wait, you'll die." "It is not death," she said sharply. "It is culmination. The purpose for which we are born." "But you look so alive," he whispered. "So full of color, and strength, and... I don't understand why your culture sees that as the time to end a life." "Because we bloom at our peak," she said, lifting her chin. "It is an offering. Nothing is more sacred." Nail looked down at his sketchpad, then back at her. "And your mate, have you chosen them?" "No." "Why not?" She met his gaze. Because I do not wish to choose someone who sees me only as a ritual. Who sees this, she gestured at herself, her body, her sashes, as a vessel to be used and returned to the soil. Nail swallowed. And what do you want to be seen as? She didn't answer. Not yet. Later that evening, Selen stood before the selection pool, a shallow basin filled with petals that mirrored the stars. According to tradition, she would cast her choice by placing a petal from her heart band into the water while thinking of her mate's face. The petal would dissolve, the name would be recorded, and the preparations would begin. Her heart band was ready. Her clan mother had braided it herself, inserting the petal of her own bloom as blessing. Selen held it tightly, her thoughts swirling. All her potential choices had been prepared in advance, honorable Lyran males, elite warriors, each with the genetic compatibility and ceremonial readiness. But when she pictured them, her mind rebelled. She didn't see their faces. She saw Nails. His eyes as he looked at the bloom. His hands brushing its edge. His voice, soft with confusion, trembling with admiration. It was wrong. It was against everything. He was human. But she felt it like the garden's song in her blood. She plucked a single memory petal from her band and stepped forward. Her fingers hovered over the pool. I select, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the chamber, Nail Rawson of the Terran delegation. Gasps rippled through the gathered witnesses. Her clan mother dropped the ceremonial torch. He is not Lyran, someone cried. He is not trained. He is not worthy. Selen let the petal fall. It dissolved instantly. It is done, she said. The next day, Nail stood nervously in the antechamber of the Bloom Sanctuary. It was like nothing he'd seen before, walls made of living vines, light filtering through translucent leaves, the air thick with a heady scent like summer thunder. He was wearing a ceremonial robe provided to him, deep green with bands of ivory that felt too sacred for him to wear. His hands shook as he touched the silk-etched sleeve. The door opened. Selen entered, dressed in a sheer veil of petal thread, her markings glowing with golden root oil. Her face was unreadable. You accepted, she said quietly. I didn't understand what I was accepting, Nail replied. Not fully. She stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. I chose you because you looked at our world and didn't flinch. You saw beauty. Not power. Not sacrifice. I didn't know it would cost your life. She touched his chest. Do you still consent? He hesitated. Then nodded. Yes. But only if we find a way to end it differently. She didn't answer. Instead, she placed a single finger over his heart, and the ritual began. The bonding was not physical at first. It was emotional, sensory. Pulses of energy passed between them, through skin, through breath, through the shared resonance of their linked glyphs. Selen guided him through ancient chants in a language she had never taught before. Her touch was precise, each movement meant to trigger the release of bloom enzymes in her body. And then she trembled. It has begun, she said faintly, her body collapsing into his arms. No, Nail whispered, cradling her. Not yet. He reached into his satchel and pulled out the micro-infuser he'd smuggled in. Inside was a blend of compound stabilizers he had developed while studying Lyraith's biochemistry. You may hate me for this, he said, but I can't let you die. He pressed the device to her neck. It hissed. Selen cried out, a sound that cracked through him like glass under pressure. Her body arched, and her glow dimmed. Then flickered. Then stabilized. She slumped in his arms, breathing hard. Alive. Her eyes fluttered open. What have you done? I gave you a chance, he said, trembling. She stared up at him, stunned. You have broken the cycle. No, he said quietly. I've just asked if you want to live. In the days that followed, Selen remained hidden under care, her body fighting the enzyme bloom her system had already begun. Nail stayed with her, refusing to leave. When her clan came for her, they found only an empty chamber and a human artist's discarded robe. They did not know she had chosen life. Not yet. But soon, the petals would fall in the garden, and they would find the roots untouched. And that, in their world, had never happened before. Nail had never felt this kind of silence before. It wasn't the absence of sound, no, the jungle around the bloom sanctuary still hummed with the life of Lyrate. Broad-leafed plants breathed with a slow rhythm. The trees, some as old as recorded memory, rustled above him with the movement of creatures too elegant to disturb. Insects, glowing with soft amber light, traced curved patterns between thick vines. But the silence he felt was inside him, in the space where certainty used to live. Selen was alive. And that changed everything. She lay quietly in the improvised shelter he'd constructed deep beneath a canopy of glowing canopy moss, her breathing steady but shallow. The stabilizers he'd injected had suppressed the enzyme cascade, halting the final bloom ritual. But he didn't know for how long. Her physiology was alien, elegant, complex, and woven into a sacred rhythm that he had just broken with desperate hands. He hadn't meant to become a criminal in an interstellar alliance. But saving her hadn't felt like a decision. It had felt like instinct. Nail stirred the nutrient solution he'd synthesized with his field equipment, praying it would be compatible with Selen's metabolism. He set the dish beside her and gently brushed the dark silk of her hair back from her forehead. Her skin shimmered, still carrying faint traces of the ritual gold. Even in her weakness, she looked like art carved from living light. "You're not meant to be fading," he whispered. "You're meant to keep growing." A soft groan escaped her lips. Her eyes opened, still storm-dark, still aware. "You stayed," she said hoarsely. "I didn't save you just to leave you in a forest," Nail said, forcing a smile. Her gaze shifted toward the canopy, tracking light patterns through the leaves. "I feel slow. My limbs, they respond like stone." "You're recovering," he said. The enzyme shutdown triggered a complete systemic shock. Your body was preparing to deconstruct itself. "You stopped it," she murmured. "You really did." "Yes." He looked down at his hands, stained with synth dye and medicinal paste. "And I don't know what happens now." Selen tried to sit up, groaning as her muscles failed her. Nail caught her with one arm, easing her back. "I chose you to end my cycle," she whispered. "You were not meant to bear this weight." "I am bearing it," he said. "And I'd choose it again." She was quiet for a long time. "Finally, they will come looking for me." "I know. If they find us, they'll drag me back to complete the bloom. My survival, what you did, it's heresy." Nail turned away, anger blooming under his skin. "Heresy? For keeping someone alive?" She closed her eyes. "It is not just about life and death. It is about identity. Every Lyran child is raised knowing that when our final season comes, we complete the cycle. We give back what we were given. But you're not just a vessel for tradition, Selen. You're a person. A mind. A soul. And that is not how my people will see it." Nail stood and stepped away, rubbing his hands through his hair. He could feel his frustration spiraling. She wasn't wrong. From what little he'd learned during his posting, the Lyran cultural identity was deeply entwined with the bloom. Dying during the final cycle wasn't a loss, it was the apex of a life well lived. The idea that someone should survive it was not just alien, it was offensive. But none of that mattered to him anymore. What mattered was that she was alive. And that somewhere deep inside her, something had stirred too, something that wanted more than just ritual. They moved by night. Selen was too weak to walk far, so Nail constructed a floating support frame using the last of his hover gel and vine stripped from the forest. It hovered barely a foot off the ground, stabilizing on its own gyroscopic pattern. She hated it. "This is undignified," she muttered as he guided the device through undergrowth. "This is survival," he replied. "You can be dignified after you've had actual sleep and nutrients." "I am not meant to sleep after the bloom," she said. "I am meant to dream as my body becomes the soil." "You're not soil," he said. It was meant to be a reassurance, but it came out fierce, almost angry. "I don't want you to disappear," he added softly. "Not like that." They kept moving. 3 days passed in near silence, broken only by brief moments of conversation or care. Selene improved slowly. Her glow returned, the blue tones of her skin warming to the familiar violet of her clan colors. She began to eat, cautiously at first, then with more strength. Nail's concoctions, adapted with limited tools and haphazard data from his field logs, seemed to be working. By the end of the 4th night, she stood without the hover frame. "You've been watching me sleep," she said, not unkindly. Nail looked up from the pot he was boiling. "You talk in your sleep," he said. "I recite ancestral verses," she said with a faint smile. "It is part of the ritual decompression. But I never completed it. Do you regret it?" She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was low. "I don't know what I feel. I was ready to die. I had made peace with it. And then you touched my body, injected foreign science, and stole my ending." He flinched. She looked up. "But I also feel curiosity." He met her gaze. "I wonder," she said, "what else I was not allowed to imagine." They camped near the edge of a cliff that overlooked the Great Bloom Valley. From above, it was a sight of impossible beauty, fields of luminous flowers opening in perfect mathematical sequence, forming spirals and fractals that glowed through the dark like constellations reversed. It was the Bloom Chamber, where all chosen gave their final offering. Selene stood at the edge, arms crossed. "I used to believe the flowers whispered," she said. "Each one carried the memory of a soul." "Do you still believe it?" Nail asked, standing beside her. "I don't know. But I want to find out." That night, she kissed him. It wasn't part of any ritual. There were no ancestral patterns or sacred geometry. Just her fingers brushing against his cheek, his hands finding her back, the two of them drawn together by something that wasn't encoded in glyphs or sanctioned by ceremony. And in that moment, something bloomed in him too. They found the ruin by accident. It was deep in a valley long overrun by invasive flora, vines with silver veins and flowers that pulsed with dangerous iridescence. Selene spotted the stonework first, carved columns, overgrown but still bearing Lyran script. "This wasn't mapped," she said. "I've never seen this place in any record." They pushed through the vines and emerged into a half-collapsed chamber, vines slithering along broken walls. Nail's breath caught. On the far side of the ruin was a mural, an enormous one, faded and cracked with time. It depicted a Lyran female in full bloom attire, but instead of dissolving into petals, her figure stood firm. And beside her was a human-like figure. Selene walked closer. Her fingers hovered over the inscription. "She who refused the fade shall inherit the root light," she translated. "This is ancient. Older than even our sacred libraries." Nail stepped beside her. "Then it's not the first time someone survived." Selene nodded slowly. "They buried it. Erased it." "Why?" he asked. She turned to face him. "Because a culture built on noble sacrifice cannot afford to remember those who chose to live." That night, Nail sat with the mural's image projected onto his datapad, adjusting contrast and trying to trace its origin. He didn't notice when Selene came to sit beside him until her hand closed gently over his. "I am beginning to understand," she said. He looked at her. "Why you fought for me. Why you risked everything." "It wasn't just biology," he said. "It wasn't about rebellion. It was you. I saw someone who wasn't ready to disappear." She nodded. Then let us both refuse the fade. And in the silent valley beneath the stars, two forms sat side by side. Neither of them knew what world would be waiting when they emerged. But for the first time, they faced it not as human and alien, not as artist and warrior, but as something new. Something neither culture had a word for yet. The first time Selene saw her, she thought she was a ghost. The figure stepped from the shadows between blossom trees, dressed in a cloak the color of dusk, marked with no clan sigil, no bloom sash, no ceremonial scars. Her violet skin had faded to a near silver, as if time had peeled away her pigment. But her eyes, they were sharp, intact. Watching. Selene of the Blossom Guard, the woman said, her voice soft and low. You were supposed to have become light by now. Selene instinctively raised her arms in defense, though her body still ached from recovery. Nail stepped protectively between them. The woman held up both hands. Peace. I am not here to return you. If anything, I'm here to warn you. Who are you? Selene demanded. I am Isha, the woman said. Once of the bloom, now of no one. Like you. Isha stepped closer into the moonlight. And then Selene saw it, a faint lattice of scar tissue along the woman's neck and collarbone, ritual markers disrupted halfway through their bloom pattern. It was incomplete. Impossible, Selene whispered. Isha tilted her head. No more than your own survival. You've disrupted the cascade. I can feel it in your aura, disordered, but stable. Selene looked to Nail, who was already reaching for the diagnostic slate they'd built from salvaged components. How do you know? Selene asked, still unsure if this was hallucination or real. Because, Isha said, 23 cycles ago, I did the same. They followed Isha through ancient bloom groves forgotten by cartographers. She moved with the ease of someone who had learned to hide. Not in fear, but in function. Nail noticed her precision first, how she avoided pollen clusters with the barest lean of her shoulder, how she never left a footprint, how she could distinguish between a ceremonial drone's vibration and the chirp of a native insect. They've been searching for you, Isha said without looking back. The clan elders. The council. There's talk of a breach in ritual sanctity. They've labeled you death-touched. Selene stiffened at the word. Then they know I survived. Isha nodded. And they'll do what they must to correct it. The word correction didn't sit well with Nail. And what is this? Selene asked, gesturing to the mist-veiled path ahead. An exile camp? A hiding hole? Isha didn't answer. Instead, she parted the brush. Beyond the trees lay a valley tucked between cliffs, one no star chart had ever mapped. Vines wound along latticed walkways. Dome structures glowed faintly beneath moss. A stream flowed through the center, its water glowing pale blue in the dark. And walking through the valley were other Lyrans. Females, marked in old ceremonial patterns, some wearing fragments of the bloom robes, others bare-armed, scarred, alive. Children ran between them, laughing. Selene's heart stopped. This is Haven's Reach, Isha said. A sanctuary for those who refuse to die. Inside the central dome, a fire burned in an open hearth. It was not just for warmth, it was for memory. The woman who greeted them wore deep crimson, like the ceremonial dye of high ritualists. Her hair was streaked with white, though her posture was firm. Her scars ran diagonally, an old warrior's mark. I am Viral, she said, nodding to both Selene and Nail. Once High Guard of the Second Bloom Ring. Now simply a survivor. I thought I was alone, Selene whispered. We all did, Viral replied. But over time, we found each other. Smuggled out by lovers, scientists, heretics. Some escaped mid-ritual. Some were helped before. All of us share the same mark, life when death was expected. Selene stepped forward, her breath catching. And, the children? Viral's smile turned soft. The children were never part of the doctrine. We were told the bloom required sacrifice to create life. That once our energy passed into the roots, our essence would return in new generations. She gestured to the nearest dome, where 2 younglings chased fireflies. Turns out, Viral said, our bodies work just fine without dying. Nail stood in the outer ring of the dome, trying to absorb what he was seeing. As an artist, he'd seen many forms of beauty, wild, chaotic, abstract. But this place built by resistance, shaped by defiance, felt like a living sculpture. Isha came to stand beside him. You're overwhelmed, she said. I'm trying to comprehend what this means, he said. How many lives were lost unnecessarily? How many could have survived? They still are, she said grimly. Every month, another bloom. Another offering. But it's all built on a lie. Not a lie, Isha corrected. A necessity that outlived its context. Centuries ago, our population outgrew our planetary balance. The enzyme cascade was engineered, sacrifice as a form of control. And it became religion, Nail whispered. Yes. He turned toward her. Then why stay hidden? Why not tell the world? Isha looked away. Because the system is deep. Those in power have families who bloomed. They call our survival blasphemy. We are not mourned. We are erased. Selen spent the next week among the unbloomed. She watched a young healer teach mid-cycle females how to manage the enzyme spikes without triggering the cascade. She sat with old warriors who told stories of past ceremonies, of their moment of choice, of the lovers who smuggled them to safety. But the more she learned, the more the silence grew inside her. When she'd agreed to the bloom, she had felt at peace. Now she felt displaced, not because she lived, but because she had believed the lie. Because she had defended it. What do we do? She asked Viral late one night. Just stay here. Hide. Viral stirred her tea. You can stay. You've earned it. But there are others, thousands of females who still believe death is their only honor. I was ready to die. And now? Selen looked out at the valley. I want to give them what I was given, a choice. The council met the next night under the open stars. Nail stood beside Selen as she made her case. I want to speak, she said. Not just here. There. Before the Bloom Council. Before my people. You won't survive it, Viral warned. They'll imprison you, or worse. Then I go as a symbol, Selen said. Not just of survival, but of what it means to question. Nail reached for her hand. I'll go with you. Selen looked at him, something unspoken between them, something fragile and dangerous and utterly real. No, she said. Not beside me. His hand dropped. She smiled. With me. Dulles had always believed in the sanctity of endings. She had committed her life to them. Cataloging the lineage scrolls of bloom rites. Ensuring the sacred verses were recorded correctly, that the patterns inscribed on the bloom shrouds matched the ancient geometry etched into the crystalline vaults of the Lyrithian archive. She knew the name of every blossom guard who had entered the final garden. She had overseen Selen's preparation. And she had felt the shame of it when, 3 cycles later, word came that Selen had not returned to the roots. She had survived. Survived. A word that should have meant triumph. Instead, in the scroll chambers, it rang like betrayal. The council had issued an immediate clandestine reclamation order. Dulles was chosen not for her strength or loyalty, though she possessed both, but for her intimacy with Selen's record. Her deep understanding of ritual process. Her discretion. Her silence. But as Dulles descended into the pathless valleys of Lyrate, following a trail of glyph-static and unauthorized hover signatures, doubt followed her like pollen on wind. And when she finally stood at the edge of Haven's Reach, seeing with her own eyes what was never meant to exist, she began to question everything she'd ever archived. You're not the first to come hunting, said Isha, as Delise was quietly disarmed by a trio of warrior exiles. The archivist stood still, refusing to show fear. Her ceremonial robes were travel-worn, streaked with dust, but she held her spine straight. "I am not here to hunt. I came for knowledge." The women exchanged glances. It wasn't the answer they expected. "You were sent by the council," Isha said coolly. "Yes," Delise admitted. "But not as an executioner. As a witness." "You mean a spy?" "No," Delise said, her voice sharper than intended. "I came to bring her back. I believed she was suffering. I thought she had been corrupted. And now?" Delise looked around. Children's laughter echoed through the glade. Women sat carving ceremonial beads into new patterns, unapproved, vibrant. Life pulsed through every vine-wrapped structure. "They live," she said simply. Isha tilted her head. "We do." Selen met Delise that evening in the outer garden of the sanctuary. Neither woman spoke for a long time. "I expected guards," Selen said eventually. "Chains. Restraint glyphs." "I expected you to be dead," Delise replied. Selen exhaled. "So did I." They stood in silence again, the tension between them older than either wanted to admit. "You catalogued my preparation," Selen said. "I transcribed your final name into the Bloom ledger," Delise confirmed. "And do you still believe it belongs there?" "I'm not sure anymore." That surprised Selen more than anything. Delise continued, "I spent my entire life memorizing rites, reciting hymns to endings I never questioned. But being here, seeing this," she gestured to the grove around them. "They aren't ghosts, Selen. They aren't half alive. They're more present than anyone I've met in the upper cities." Selen nodded. "We found something beyond the ritual." "No," Delise corrected gently. "You remembered something that was erased." The next day, Delise requested access to the ancient mural, the one Selen and Nail had uncovered weeks ago. The one depicting the standing bloom. Isha granted it. "But you'll need a translator," she said. "That script predates your archives." Delise bristled at first. She was the highest-ranked archivist of the East Bloom Circle. But the deeper they walked into the ruins, the more she realized her training was based on filtered history. Nail met them at the mural, already working on a new photonic contrast overlay. He didn't speak when Delise arrived. Just stepped aside. She stood before the wall for a long time. "Some of these markings," she whispered, "are pre-unification. Pre-faith. Before the bloom was law," Selen said quietly. "Before it was weaponized," Nail thought, but said nothing. Delise traced the lines. "They were taught to complete the bloom. Not because the gods willed it, but because their bloodlines were too dangerous." Isha stepped forward. "Population control. Political obedience. The first bloom wasn't a gift. It was an order." Delise shuddered. "We've based our entire society on a mechanism designed to suppress our own power. And called it honor," Selen said. That night, Delise met alone with Nail near the stream. "I used to think humans were crude," she said without preamble. He smirked, crouching beside the water's edge. "Most of us are. But you weren't crude. You were kind." He shrugged. "I just didn't want her to die. And now?" Nail looked up, eyes catching the starlight. "Now I want her to live." There was no challenge in his tone. No claim. Just truth. Delise sat beside him. "I don't know if the council will listen. But they need to hear this." Nail studied her for a moment. "You're going back?" "Yes." "To testify?" "To remember," she said. "For those who never got the chance." The council hall was a cathedral of stone and crystal, carved from the mountain's bone centuries ago. Thousands of years of tradition pulsed within its walls. When Selen, Thalis, and Nail entered, with Viral, Isha, and 12 other death-touched women behind them, the silence was deafening. "You do not belong here," spat High Elder Zephan. "You defile this hall with your breathing," hissed Bloomkeeper Lareth. But Thalis stepped forward. "I am Archivist Thalis Veneran, 8th tier of the Eastern Vault. I come not to defile, but to correct." The assembly stirred. She raised her hand, activating a projection. It displayed the standing bloom. Gasps echoed. "The record is incomplete," Thalis said. "Erased deliberately. The enzyme cascade was an engineered response to conflict. Not divine. Not sacred. Political. You risk spiritual fracture," the High Elder warned. Selen stepped forward. "Then let it fracture." Nail took her hand. "I lived," she said. "And I do not regret it." One of the Bloom priestesses rose from the side row. She was younger than the rest, her ceremonial robes too large for her frame. "I am approaching my own bloom," she said. "If what they say is true, do I have the right to choose?" The hall erupted in argument. But the question had already fractured the silence. Outside the hall, Selen exhaled shakily. "They'll never let this go unpunished," she said. "They already have," Nail murmured, nodding to the crowd gathering at the foot of the mountain. Lyrans. Hundreds. Standing silently. Holding fragments of broken ritual markers, showing support. "We won't all survive this," Thalis said. "No," Selen agreed. "But we'll change everything." The last time Selen stood beneath the Bloom spires, she was ready to die. Now, she returned to them not as a vessel of tradition, but as a storm. She wore no ceremonial veil. No ritual dye. Her sash had been burned in the fire the Night Haven's reach was breached. Her scars were still visible, unadorned by gold, proud in their imperfection. She moved with the confidence of one who had broken the sacred cycle and lived. At her side walked Nail, the human artist who had painted nothing but her face for the last 2 cycles. Behind them came 37 death-touched Lyran women. Some bore children on their hips. Some wore hybridized robes, half traditional, half new. One had woven her own sash from blossom roots and Terran silk thread. Another walked barefoot across the sacred stone, her bare feet whispering rebellion into the earth. And the rest of the world watched. From the cliffs above, from the clouds beyond, from orbital stations and council drones, broadcast lenses beamed the unthinkable across every Lyran outpost, every diplomatic relay. For the first time in Lyrathian history, the Bloom season had begun, and the Chosen had returned. The council chamber was cold with ceremonial indifference. High Elder Zephan sat flanked by Bloom keepers and warrior priests. Their expressions carved in obsidian and ivory. "The assembly is not here to debate heresy," he announced. "This is a hearing for the final judgment of Selen of the Blossom Guard." But Selen stepped forward first, voice steady. "I do not recognize the judgment of death from those who refuse to witness life." Murmurs rippled through the crowd gathered outside the chamber's perimeter. "I was chosen. Prepared. Honored. And I believed what I was taught. That my death would become life. That sacrifice was sacred. That bloom was destiny." She turned her gaze to the outer windows, where light from the Bloom Valley reflected like a sea. "But I lived. Not in defiance. In awakening." She placed her hand on her own chest. "My body still sings the Bloom songs. But it does not end with them. I am not ash. I am root." Elder Zephan leaned forward, eyes sharp. "You seek to dismantle the foundation of Lyran identity." "I seek to reveal it," Selen replied. "To show what was buried beneath the songs. The standing bloom existed. You buried it. Blasphemy." "The enzyme cascade is engineered," Thalis said, stepping forward with a data scroll etched in ancestral glyphs. "Initiated during the Blood Balance Wars. I have verified the genetic sequence signatures myself. And I am witness, came a new voice. From the side, a tall Lyran woman entered, the new Bloom priestess Selen had spoken 2 weeks before. She wore ceremonial robes, but her sash was blank. Unmarked. I postponed my ritual, she said, raising her chin. Until I know the truth. The council broke into chaos. Voices arguing. Guards shifting. Hands going to weapons. Until Nail stepped forward, not with a weapon, but with his data pad. I didn't come here to challenge your gods, he said. But I've seen your art. Your murals. Your spiral math. You understand beauty better than any species I've ever met. He turned the pad to face them, revealing his latest work, a holopaint of Selen, not in mid-bloom, but standing tall, roots growing from her feet into the ground, arms reaching upward like branches. But beauty doesn't always have to end. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was receptive. And into that silence, a new voice spoke. Viral stepped into the chamber, flanked by other leaders from Haven's Reach. We do not ask for vengeance, she said. We ask for recognition. That life can bloom in more than one direction. Her voice rang like steel. We are not ghosts. We are future. The debate lasted 4 days. Every point of tradition was challenged. Every verse of sacred Bloom text was reread, re-anchored, retranslated by the Lys and others now emboldened to speak. Science met faith. And neither flinched. In the end, the council didn't agree. Not truly. But they yielded. Outnumbered. Outvoiced. Outlived. The decree came in the 5th Bloom morning. Not broadcast with fanfare. Not read from the Blossom Towers. Just a simple message etched across every citizen glyph. Let all those of final season be offered the right to choose their own conclusion. The bloom shall no longer be mandated by time, but by will. Selen stood again beneath the first tree. But this time, she wore no sash. No ritual marks. She came simply to say goodbye. I thought I would be buried here, she said softly, tracing the bark. And in a way, I still am. Nail wrapped his arms around her from behind. You're more rooted than any bloom before you. She leaned into him. Do you regret it? She asked. Saving me. I regret waiting to kiss you until after you tried to die. She laughed, and it echoed through the branches. They left Lyraith a week later. Not in secret. Not in exile. As envoys. The diplomatic fleet sent by the Terran Concord carried them to orbit, their shuttle painted with a single blossom carved into its hull, open, but intact. A symbol of the new path. Selen was appointed as the first cultural liaison between Lyraith and human systems. A position once reserved for neutral scholars, now held by a woman who had lived both traditions and chosen a new one. Nail became the unofficial chronicler of the Bloom shift. His art hung in space stations, embassies, and hybrid sanctuaries from 5 systems. But none meant more to him than the small portrait that sat in their quarters, a sketch of Selen watching the sunrise, barefoot in the garden. Years passed. And the gardens of Lyraith changed. Some still chose the bloom. Many did not. Shrines were built for both paths, one for conclusion, one for continuation. The priests became keepers of choice instead of law. And Haven's Reach became something else entirely. No longer a sanctuary. But a school. Selen walked its halls 10 years after the decree, her robes simple, her scars more visible now with age. Children ran past her, laughing, some Lyran, some mixed. Some born of bloom cycles. Some not. She paused in the central corridor, where a mural had been painted over the old archives. It depicted a tree. Its roots ran into the ground, glowing with ancient light. Its branches reached skyward, each one blooming in a different way. And beneath it stood 2 figures, one human, one Lyran. Hand in hand. Looking up.